Little bit about me is, for those of you that weren't in the earlier session, yes, I am an attorney here. I actually got involved in doing this work. I actually grew up on the grounds of Agnew State Hospital. I was part of a family of institutional workers. There is no Agnew State Hospital now, it's rubble, and that's where it belongs here. I did disability rights work, worked at DREDA, DRA, a number of different groups here. I have a law practice that is entirely focused on working with folks with disabilities. So we do estate planning, we do special needs trust, that kind of thing. I'm on the board of the ARC of California. Also relevant to this, one of the things I want to end on is what's going on in California, because we will have a California ABLE Act coming up, and how you can get involved in shaping policy and education and that kind of thing. When are we going to be able to use ABLE Act accounts in California? Guess what? You can do it right now. There are brochures for the STABLE program here. And on the videos, there's a thing called the Darcy series. And so there's a very competent but very impaired young lady named Darcy who has cerebral palsy, who actually shows you how to apply for an ABLE account. She does it online. It took her 19 minutes with one finger. We think it will take about 12 minutes with two fingers, and we think it'll take about 7 minutes with two hands, okay? Although if I'm typing, it'll take me 25 minutes. It's really easy to do, okay? Whew, okay, let's go through this because we've got a lot to cover. So the basics. Do most of you know what the ABLE Act is, or you're just lost, or you have some idea? Okay, I want to cover what it is, but I want to talk about applications. Okay, starting in 2015, to my knowledge, this is 2016, states would have the option to establish ABLE accounts, okay? Now, as we're going to talk about, June of 2016, the STABLE program was put in place. And we'll talk about the other programs, so you don't have to wait. We got them right now, and we'll talk about that. This is a new tool, and this is one of those things you really want to study. So part of this as folks who might use it, but also I'm assuming some of you are advocates here. Part of this is to be able to go into your communities and really talk knowledgeably about what this does. I'll tell you, there is a ton of misinformation about the ABLE Act out there, both directions, okay? But you can trust me because I'm an attorney. Okay, so here we go. So what I want to cover is, when is an ABLE account the right tool? When other things like special needs trusts are more appropriate. And then in a lot of situations, my prediction is a lot of people that traditionally have special needs trusts are going to have both, and how the two things work together. You know, here's the thing to look at. All these things are just tools. You know, which tool should you use? And really, you got to understand them to pick it out, okay? So, but the thing about it is, and this is really the important thing, and those of you that attended the previous session here, and a lot of the sessions throughout the Supported Life Conference, is, you know, there was a promise in the deinstitutionalization movement to have sustainable funding for robust community programs for all persons with disabilities. And that didn't exactly happen, okay? So really, in a way, this opens up a conversation, because we need to do a massive education effort in California. And it's not just about the ABLE Act. I think, as we were hearing about in the last session, most people don't really understand how screwed up our system is, okay? Maybe you guys are in some community where everything's hunky-dory, not where I live, okay? So let's start off with the first thing, okay? Who is eligible for an ABLE account? There's really two tiers. The first tier is if you are getting SSI, Medicaid, IHSS, Social Security disability income, childhood disability benefits, any of the programs, the disability programs before the age of 26, you are automatically eligible, okay? End of game. Now, for folks with developmental disabilities, that's usually a piece of cake, because you have to be disabled before the age of 18. So 18 is before 26. That should be a piece of cake. For our brethren with mental health issues, it's not always that clear. Many folks with mental health issues, maybe they were disabled well before the age of 26, but they didn't apply for benefits until maybe they're 30 or 40. So are they out? Well, here's the other way to do it. You could do it through a certification by a doctor, and the certification has to certify that you would have been eligible for benefits here, that level of disability before the age of 26. Now, there's going to be a theme when we go through this. Anybody out here on SSI or have a loved one on SSI? Anybody ever dealt with SSI? Who feels that it's a very friendly program and they're really out to help you and do whatever they can for you? Well, that's good for you. Okay. I don't think it's a disability-friendly program. This is actually administered by the Treasury Department. Believe it or not, well before the ABLE Act, the Treasury Department has always been a disability-friendly agency. Well before this. I have a master's of tax here, and I teach classes at law schools, and I have a class I love to teach called Wacky Things the IRS Does When There's a Disabled Person Involved, and they will bend the rules and do whatever they can to make it work. SSI, Social Security, I haven't seen them do that. They're quite the opposite. The whole thing is very loose. And even on the certification, if you apply for the stable program here, what you have to certify is you have to certify that you have a certification in your possession, and if they ever ask for it, you'll give it to them. It's just that loose, okay? It's hard for a lot of people to get their arms around it because most of us are terrified of the agencies we work with. This one is very friendly, okay? If the ABLE account qualifies because of a certification, you can't turn around and take that certification and say, hey, I've got a certification, give me SSI or a Social Security disability or whatever. You still have to go through the same level of hell. But so it's good, but it's not that good. Other key features. Contributions into an ABLE account could be made by any person. Now, any person doesn't mean what we might think it means, because a person could be a trust, it could be an annuity, it can come from anywhere. So as we're going to talk about later, how in some cases we might want to tie a special needs trust in with an ABLE account. But like Citizens United, a person is a little broader than most of us think. So a person could be from anywhere. So I don't even know why they say by any person. It doesn't matter where it comes from. As long as it goes in the ABLE account, that's fine. Contributions are not tax deductible. So and as we're going to talk about, I have an ABLE account for my niece, Erica, who is in New York. She has Down syndrome here. So I'm making monthly contributions into her ABLE account here. And do I get a tax deduction? No, but so what the heck, but we still make the contributions. Income earned by the accounts are not taxed for the most part. We're going to talk about that. So it's like this comes under the 529 plan laws, and it's just like a regular 529 plan savings account. The interest earned on it, it grows tax-free, and as long as you use it for the things you're supposed to, there are no taxes on it. And withdrawals, including the portions attributable to the income earned for qualified expenses, are not taxable. Pretty straightforward. You're limited to one ABLE account. And this is really important. This gets mixed up all the time. For normal 529 plans, you can have as many accounts as you want. On an ABLE account, you get one ABLE account, period. So the one we signed up for Erica, she's not allowed to have a second account. And most of the monitoring going on by the federal government really deals with making sure there's only one ABLE account, okay? And the total annual contributions are limited to whatever the gift tax limitation is for that year. This year it is $14,000. And by the way, I'm recording this, so I may be talking to Erica in a minute, so it's not as strange as you think here, because she does watch these things. Because every time I say Erica, I have to put another $20 in her able account. So Erica. Okay, so we go back to this. So we're not going to put $14,000 in Erica's able account. Well, that probably cost me about $80. Okay, so anyway, so the way it works is you can only put up to $14,000. Now, there's always cost of living increases. So it might be next year, maybe the year after. Eventually it'll go to 15, then it'll go to 16. But right now it's $14,000 a year, period, end of game. So you can have multiple people making contributions, but when it hits 14, end of game. Okay, and then you can contribute next year. Aggregate contributions are subject to the overall limit for that state's program for 529 plans. Those of you that are not used to 529 plans, like for instance, I have a 529 plan savings, college savings account for my grandchildren, one of which is in the autism spectrum, but I think she's going, in fact, I think she'll go to law school, so there we go, because Grandpa wants her to here. And so the most you can put it is whatever the overall limit is for that state. So for instance, when California's program is up and running, we think about June next year, our limit, I believe, is $350,000. So if I use a California plan, I can only do it up to $350,000. Every state is different. But here's the thing. At $14,000 a year, it's going to take 25 years to hit $350,000. I don't think I will ever see a maxed out ABLE account. And I'll show you other reasons why most people, this actually, for most people, for families, it's not really, it's best used as not as a savings account, and we'll go through why. Okay? Now, you guys with me so far? Because I know I'm going pretty fast, but I want to leave time for questions. So, here's the next thing, and sometimes this is hard to get your arms around. There are two tiers that you can contribute to. So as long as the ABLE account is below $100,000, it will not interfere with your SSI. Now, first off, not everybody's on SSI, and many folks here are going to be on childhood disability benefits and other programs, so that may or may not be an issue, okay? But if you're on SSI, when it goes to $100,000, everything after that is counted towards your $2,000 resource limit. So let's say the ABLE account goes up to $101,000. You can only have another $1,000. See how that works? That you're over $100,000. Now you can only have $1,000 resource limit because the other $1,000 counts towards your resource limit. Okay. Basically, the basic rule is when it goes over $100,000, it starts interfering with your SSI, as we're going to see it goes into suspension. Now, as you continue to grow the ABLE account, so let's say this was the California plan at $350,000, you can keep adding to it and you keep your Medi-Cal until you hit the top limit, okay? Now, for most of us, I know as a special needs trust attorney and as a benefits advocate, in many cases, it's the Medi-Cal and the IHSS that may be the most important program we're preserving, but it really depends on the individual. Now, if the beneficiary is receiving SSI, and remember, if they're getting SSI, I mean, once again, I think for many people, by the time it gets to that limit, they'll be on a different program altogether anyway. Then when it goes over $100,000, then what happens is the SSI is placed in suspension, meaning that, and when the assets drop below $100,000, then the SSI benefits resume. But here's the good news. Who in their right mind would ever want to apply for SSI twice, right? I mean, once is enough. So the cool thing is you don't have to reapply for SSI. Now, there's a bunch of technical rules with this we're not going to go through today. And on my website here, we will have more of the technical rules later. But what we need to know for this session is, let's go back to this. Two tiers. The first tier is that when it reaches $100,000 and goes over that, your SSI goes into suspension, but your Medi-Cal, Medicaid continues, and then then once again, the upper limit is whatever that state's 529 plan limit is. So So, for instance, once again, well, if we had a California beneficiary who was in an Arizona plan, Arizona's limit is $412,000. Arizona doesn't have an ABLE program, but when it does, if you join the Arizona program, the limit is $412,000 here, and therefore, when you go over the $100,000, your SSI would go into suspension. But if you use the Arizona program, you could go all the way up to $412,000. Now, here's the cool thing. All the programs are working pretty nice with each other, and you can switch from one program to another here. In fact, despite the fact that we're putting many, many people in the Ohio program, I like the Ohio program. If you want to go to the California program when it's up and running, you could just switch it over, and there's not going to be any charge to do that. What can you contribute? Cash, period, end of game. So that means you can't take like an appreciated stock and put it in the ABLE program and not realize the gain. If you had an appreciated stock, like if somebody gave you some stock and it was worth $10 when it was given to you and now it's worth $100,000, you got $90,000 of gain, you got to sell that stock, realize the $90 of gain, and then you can put whatever is left, which would probably be like $82 in the account. So what can you use it for? I see a lot of people that criticize this, but I will tell you, as somebody who is an administrator of a pooled trust, this is 90% of what people use special needs trust for. So you can use it for education. You can use it for housing. We're going to come back to housing. Transportation, employment and training and support, assistive technology and personal support services, health, prevention and wellness, financial management and administrative fees. Somebody was looking out for me. They said, you can use it for legal fees. Okay, so it looks good to me. Expenses for oversight and monitoring and funeral and burial expenses. Now, what do I don't see on this? I don't see Disneyland. I don't see Disney World. There's a bunch of things here, although as we're going to talk about, I'm not 100% sure you can't use it for Disneyland. We'll just have to figure that out. But this is 90% of what people use in special needs trust, okay? Investments, and I know I had some questions earlier about investments. Can I just go down to Wells Fargo? Well, maybe Wells Fargo isn't as popular today. Can I just go down to, Citizens Bank or something? By the way, I actually like Wells Fargo, but but as far as I know, I only have one account here. So anyway, going back to this, when can I go down to Wells Fargo and get one of the ABLE account things? And the answer is never. Okay. These are done by the Department of Treasury, okay? So every state is going to have some group that's doing the investments, and so they're the ones doing the investments. Usually what they'll have is a whole series of investments you can get into, and they go from crazy conservative to conservative, okay? There's not really an aggressive model. You can change the investments twice a year, and that's it. So if you want to set up, for instance, an ABLE account for your kid and day trade with this thing, you can't do it, okay? Which you shouldn't day trade with your kid's money anyway. So like I have a traditional 529 plan for my grandchildren, and quite frankly, I've never changed the investments. Maybe I should, but I just don't, okay? With the 529 plan, the investment options are determined by the states. And they'll give you a series of rational options. Okay. Penalties for non-qualified expenses. And this would be a little hard to get your head wrapped around. I've been really involved in this for about 7 years, and I'm like crazy involved in it here. But let's just walk through this. Contributions are in after-tax dollars, but earnings grow tax-free, just like any other 529 plan. Withdrawals have to be for qualified expenses. Remember that list here? Or else the earning portions are subject to a regular income tax plus a 10% penalty. And we're going to really cover that specifically, okay? But let me give you an example. Let's say Bob, and one of the cool things about this is, for those of you that attended the earlier session, our SSI rules, both statewide and nationally, are way out of date. It's just ridiculous, okay? And right now we have a $2,000 resource limit for SSI and Medi-Cal, which was set, I think, in 1985. If you did just the most conservative cost of living increase about that resource limitation, that should be somewhere about $15,000, okay? I mean, $2,000, that's a ridiculous number. And the problem is always for folks who are working, that I get a lot of folks that go over that resource limit all the time, and then they've got to figure out what to do with the money. So let's say Bob is working, okay? And with this, Bob is working and he's earning some money, and he's just been going over the resource limit over and over and over again. He opens up an Enable account and he takes this excess money and it puts it in his Enable account. And let's say over a decade, Bob saves $50,000. Bob is pretty frugal, okay? And over that period, it earns $10,000 for a total of $60,000. If Bob were to use that as a down payment on a house, remember that housing was on the list of okie dokie things here, that would be an excellent use of this thing. There would be no taxes, no nothing, you know, and it would be an excellent use of these things. Although, and a down payment, that wouldn't be in the Bay Area. Maybe that's Bakersfield, which I love Bakersfield. But anyway, let's say he did that. Now, let's say instead he were to use $5,000 to go to Disneyland, which I don't think is on that list. Then the $5,000 would be taxable plus a 10% penalty on the earned income that he earned. And the reason I put it maybe is this. On the technical regs, which I'm not going to go through today because of time, it has all sorts of examples of where the IRS bends over backwards to make it work. So I'm not so sure that they would ding Bob. I think they're supposed to ding him. But if they do what the IRS has always done, they'll find some way to make this work, okay? I know it's hard to get your head around that a federal agency is out there to help us, but it actually does. It does happen, so just get used to it. Qualified individuals or their families are no longer limited to joining only in the state where the beneficiary lives. At the end of the last legislative session, at the end of 2015, at the very last minute, they filed an amendment that said you don't have to do it in your own state. You can choose any state that you like. The current states that are up and running that we can join are Ohio, Nebraska, and Tennessee. But I like the Ohio program. But anyway, and there'll be more. My understanding is New Jersey's about to come online, Pennsylvania's about to come online, California will come online probably about June or July this year. Now, one of the reasons you might choose California when it comes up, and we don't know what's going to happen, and policy is being put together right now, okay, is that some states actually give a state income tax deduction here. So it may be that if they do that, you might want to join the Ohio program, but if there's a benefit of being in California, move that account to California and get that benefit because, hey, I don't know about you, anytime I can get a tax deduction, I'm in for it. But you can still only have one ABLE account, period, end of game. Let's talk about the Medicaid liens, okay? There is and I'm going to just put these all back up. One unique feature about an ABLE account is there is a lien on the death of the ABLE beneficiary for whatever is left in the account. Now, the fact that there's a lien doesn't lessen the value of this tool. I will tell you, one thing I've been a little critical of is there's been many programs that talk about the ABLE account and never mention the lien. In fact, if you go to National Disability Institute, they have a thing called 10 Things You Ought to Know About the ABLE Act. Guess what's not on that list? The lien, okay? Once again, I want to tell you, the fact that there's a lien, or they call it a clawback, I think to confuse us, that doesn't lessen the value of this, but it's something you want to take into consideration. So how does that work? What the law says is in the event that the qualified beneficiary dies with remaining assets in the ABLE account, the assets in the ABLE account are first distributed to any state Medicaid plan that provided medical assistance to the disabled beneficiary. The amount of the lien payback is calculated based on the amount paid by Medicaid after the creation of the ABLE account. okay? And I'm going to go through an example. Now, there are some exceptions because you can use it for burial expenses, and there's a few other things you can use it for, but for the most part, it's going to be subject to a lien. Quite frankly, I'd like to see us call them Medicaid payback accounts just so people are clear about this. Once again, it doesn't lessen the value of this thing. In fact, I'm going to show you some applications that I think are really cool, but there's a lien, okay? So what's California's position? And one of the reasons I'm excited about the ABLE Act account is some of the inequities that we have with our state laws, including Medicaid liens in general, okay? California, and by the way, this is Medicaid for any medical assistance. California has taken a very aggressive position with managed care that every dollar of Medicaid spent, Medi-Cal, is for medical expenses, which I think is absurd. And that includes, and we have been involved in a lawsuit where we've lost twice, and we're probably going to take this all as far as we can, where they've taken, the Department of Health Services has taken the position that residential care is medical care. Now, for those of you that are getting residential care through the regional center, those numbers are big. I don't see why you would count residential care as medical care. Their reasoning is, well, if they weren't in a residence, we put them in a nursing home. And my answer is that's bullshit. Okay, but anyway, attendant care under IHSS, even if provided by parents, despite the fact that there's a federal law that says that's not medical care, DHS has taken the position, we don't care, we're counting it as medical care. Transportation services, even if not for medical appointments, incontinence supplies, day programs, pre-vocational services, Medicare Part B premium payments, basically every dollar the state spends on Medicaid, they've taken the position that this is medical care. I don't think that's fair. And one of the things I'm hoping to get out of the ABLE Act is let's deal with this inequity, because even with special needs trusts and regular Medicaid liens, I don't think that our disabled community should have to be subject to that. Let's do a quick comparison of liens. Now, if you own a home and you're on Medicaid, doesn't matter if it's long-term care or whatever, on that home, if you own it in your own name, there's a lien for any Medicaid you've used after the age of 55. Now, there's a new law going in that's going to make it real easy to avoid, but this is for everybody, okay? So, for an ABLE account, the lien is for any Medicaid used from the time the account was set up. And I'm going to go through an example in just a minute. For a third party or a normal estate planning trust, there is no lien because the beneficiary never actually owned it, okay? And for a D4A trust, which is a self-settled trust, this would be like the kind of special needs trust you got if you were in a personal injury accident or something and put it into a trust. There's a Medicaid lien for every dollar of Medicaid you've used during your entire lifetime. This is one of the reasons why you might want to bookmark these videos, because there's a lot to this. So there are different kinds of liens, and now we have 4 different standards we have to deal with depending on what the situation is. Let's go through an example. Bill and Cindy have a son named Johnny who was born with many medical complications. Johnny was placed on a Medicaid waiver, Medi-Cal waiver, same thing, which allows Johnny to qualify for services under Medicaid without counting Bill and Cindy's assets for resources. Very common for regional center clients, okay? While the private insurance covers Johnny's basic medical needs for medical care, Medi-Cal covers services that private insurance does not cover. At age 16, Bill and Cindy established an ABLE account for Johnny, and the family members began making maximum annual contributions, which is $14,000 a year. Sadly, Johnny passes away at age 26, 10 years after the ABLE account was established. At Johnny's death, there's $140,000 in the account, 10 times 14, okay. Cindy reported Johnny's death to the ABLE program administering his account. Doesn't matter if it's Ohio, California, Nebraska, doesn't matter. It all gets reported back to California. Johnny had a Medicaid lien, which is a total of $130,000. I pulled this from a real case, from a self-settled case we did. So these are not made up numbers. Now, it could be different depending on your services. It depends on what you're receiving. So Johnny has a total of $130,000, of which $100,000 was incurred after the ABLE account was established. His lien would be $100,000 less. There are a few expenses you can take out of it, like burial expenses and that kind of thing. See what's going on? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now here's the problem. A lot of folks don't realize they're using Medicaid when they're on these waivers. I mean, and the other thing is, the law says you're supposed to be able to ask them what the amount is, but it's not like you go on a website and make a few clicks and say, hey, where are we with this? And Department of Health Services is notoriously inaccurate when it comes to these things until you pass away, and then they lop on everything under the sun. Now, while this kind of situation is not unusual, you got to look at your situation, okay? Unfortunately or fortunately, all disabled people are not the same. They don't use the same benefits. They don't use the same level of services. So maybe Johnny's using massive amounts of Medicaid. Maybe he's not using any Medicaid at all. You don't know, but you got to look at your situation. And the other thing with this is a lot of families, you know, to help our regional center system, they'll go on institutional deeming waivers or Medicaid waivers or the DD waivers and not realize that they're using more Medicaid than they realize. Look at the present usage as far as future usage of Medicaid. Also look at your state's definition of medical assistance. The example that was given was California, which is extreme, okay? Which if we all work together, maybe we can change that. While the Medicaid payback is a consideration, it's only one factor. So that doesn't make it evil. It's just something you should take into consideration. Basically, this is a 529 plan with a lien for any Medicaid used from the time the beneficiary account was created. Compare that with the estate planning special needs trust where there is no lien. So what would you consider? Is some services for children are based on Medicaid waivers and it's not always apparent? Is the beneficiary using Medicaid? Many Medicaid recipients use minimum amounts of Medicaid. Some use massive amounts of Medicaid. Everybody's different. Doesn't matter, okay? Some people just plain don't care, okay? I hear this from parents all the time. The government has helped my child. I don't really mind giving it back to the government. And if that's how you feel, good for you, okay? For me, if I'm contributing to an account, if Erica passes away, I just as soon not have it not go to the state of New York. I mean, I love the state of New York, but not that much. Okay, who is in charge of the account? And for this conference, I think this would be really important. Now, one of the really cool things is the person who is in charge of the account or the owner of the account is the able beneficiary themselves. I would think at this conference that would be somewhat appealing in most cases here. So it's really clear that that's true. But the Department of Treasury, and the things that have the little Department of Treasury things up there, these are blocked and copied from the Treasury regs. Once again, the Department of Treasury is telling us that they realize that certain individuals may be unable to establish the accounts themselves. So what if you have somebody who doesn't have capacity? Like, for instance, my niece, she doesn't really have capacity. She has Down syndrome, and, you know, once again, which is a spectrum in and of itself. So there's many folks with Down syndrome that are perfectly competent to do that. My niece is not in that group. So in that case, she wasn't able to do it. So here's how it works. If she's not capable of doing it herself, then it can be done through an agent under a power of attorney. Now, she can't do that because she doesn't have the capacity to establish a power of attorney, but let's say she did. Or the other thing is, many folks with cerebral palsy, for instance, they may be perfectly competent, but they just can't sign the paperwork. I mean, very, very common. So they work under a power of attorney. That's cool, okay? Or if none, his or her parents. So what we did with Erica is her mother established the account. The legal guardian, which we call conservators here in California, and this is something we're going to really want to keep in mind, because let's say many families I work with, and I never endorse that we should always conserve everybody with a disability. That's just wrong, okay? And let's just say the family doesn't want to conserve Erica here, even though she may or may not be conservatable. Well, here's the problem we're going to have. When the parents pass away, that's the end of the list. Who else is going to be able to do this? And we would have to conserve her at that point. Now, that would be a consideration in that situation. If you're dealing with a competent person, then you'd want them to sign a power of attorney in case they lost capacity as quick as possible. Therefore, the only person who can establish an ABLE account is the eligible individual, an agent under a power of attorney, his or her parents, or in our state, a conservator. To go through this, what if the account holder lacks capacity? So now we're going to talk about who can control this thing here. And if they don't, and the person who is in charge is the person with signature authority. That's the new term they're using. Who has signature authority? Well, guess what? It's the same list. It's the eligible individual. Let's go back to Erica. Yeah, she has a lot of skills, but that's not it. An agent under a power of attorney, his or her parents, or a legal guardian or conservator. Same group. Practice tip, I kind of mentioned this like twice, but if the beneficiary has capacity, get them to sign a power of attorney so that we don't have to turn around and conserve them, okay? I mean, just because you have a disability doesn't mean that something else bad can't happen to you, so it just kind of works like that. If the eligible individual wants to have a sibling, for instance, have a power of attorney, let's say she had capacity, but she'd rather have her sister, Sierra, have capacity, then you would do it through a power of attorney. Okay, we did that. Okay, we'll get past that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about capacity. Okay, so Fred and Wilma have a daughter named Pebbles who was born with a severe disability and cognitive impairments. Okay, let's just assume she doesn't have capacity. They establish an ABLE account under the authority of Pebbles' parents. Pebble lacks capacity to establish or manage the account. She also lacks the capacity to establish a valid power of attorney. Fred and Wilma maintain signature authority over the account as long as they're alive and they have capacity. Fred and Wilma pass away in a tragic accident, and their neighbor Barney promises to look after Pebbles if anything were to happen to them. In order for Barney to, or anyone else, to have signature authority over the account, he would need to become Pebbles' guardian or conservator, or adopter, or conserve her. If this were California, you could get an emergency temporary conservatorship if there are circumstances that are truly an emergency, but it would take 2 to 3 weeks minimum. If everything were in order, it would also cost a ton of money here. The permanent conservatorship would take at least 4 months. Fortunately for the attorneys, the ABLE account can be used for legal fees. Unfortunately, this is going to take funds that would be better spent on Pebbles, unless you really think it's better spent on attorneys, and God bless you for that. Okay, so let's go back to this. In determining whether an ABLE account is right for you or your loved one, if the ABLE beneficiary has capacity to manage his or her own stuff and loses capacity, have them sign a power of attorney. I think that's about the 4th time I said it here. And if they lack capacity, really consider what's going to happen as far as, how we're going to maintain that management. Let's talk about housing. Okay, I will tell you, as an attorney who administers special needs trusts, housing is the #1 issue I deal with, second to nothing. Maybe 4th is attendant care, but it's housing. Okay, so one of the greatest challenges that all Californians have in securing affordable housing here is, disabled or not, trying to have affordable housing is a challenge. If you're a person with a disability or a family with a disabled loved one, it can be really daunting, okay? And it's really tough. The ABLE account provides us a new tool to assist persons with disabilities and their families to secure housing, and in some cases minimize the loss of benefits. Okay, so this presentation is going to review how the ABLE Act can be used to assist a beneficiary of an ABLE account to provide for their housing needs. Okay, and by the way, actually comes off of my videos. It is strongly, I strongly urge you, if you're going to do this, work with an advisor, an advocate, or somebody who knows what they're doing, because these rules are kind of complex. So Remember, we talked about what you can use things for, and one of the things is housing. Okay, well, you think that's cool. But one of the things about how the law was set up is when they passed the law, they actually intended that if you were on SSI, you wouldn't be able to use it for housing without a penalty. Well, they wrote the law pretty poorly, so they got themselves halfway there. So you can use it for SSI for housing, but if you're on SSI and use it for housing, it could become a non-qualified distribution for tax purposes, and it could be subject to the tax. I know that doesn't make any sense, just go with it. Okay, contributions then in a normal ABLE account are in tax-free dollars, but earnings grow tax-free, right here. Withdrawals have to be for qualified expenses, or earnings portions will be subject to a 10% penalty, and the income it ends up on the tax return of the disabled beneficiary. Well, let's look at this. And I just want to go through something to compare this to show you what the problem is that this conquers. There are three kinds of income. That's what they were discussing in the session before. I'm going to cover the last one, which is called in-kind support and maintenance, which is the stupidest thing in the world. And I hope during my lifetime we can eliminate this. So let me just walk you through this. If somebody is on SSI, if you pay for their food and shelter, whether you do it through a special needs trust, you do it as a family member assisting the person with their housing, so you pay the landlord directly, however you do it, it will reduce their SSI dollar for dollar, capped at $264.33. I have this conversation with parents all the time going, that doesn't make any sense. No. Why am I getting penalized for helping my disabled child? Because the law is stupid. Is there something we could do about it? Change the law. Okay, I mean, that's basically, or let's find a clever way to get around this. I have a clever way to get around it now. And this is what's called the presumed maximum value. Okay, now there are 10 things that are counted for this ISM reduction. And many folks, maybe some of you folks in this room, you're not getting the $889.40. And here's an example. If you say to your child, you live in my house and I'm not going to charge you rent and I'm not going to make you pay for food, Social Security goes, that's cool. We're going to reduce your benefits by $264.34. Does that make sense? It doesn't make any sense. I mean, shouldn't you get a tax? You should get a thank you, you know? I mean, for God's sake. So if you pay for food, mortgage, real estate, rent, heating, fuel, gas, electricity, water, sewer, garbage, whether it's from a trust or from a family member or not charging them rent, you take that reduction. So let me go through an example, because sometimes these are a little easier to deal with when we go through an example. Let's say Belinda has been disabled from birth and receives $889.40 a month in SSI. And a major expenditure for her are her housing and utility expenses. Now, she'd really like to move into an apartment for $1,000 a month, which is not going to be that fancy a place. But she's going to have a problem of paying $1,000 a month when she's getting $889.40. Only the federal government can do that kind of thing. She can't do it, okay? So she's going to need a little help from a friend. Well, Belinda's parents if they were to give her $1,000 a month directly, that's not going to work, because that's going to reduce her SSI dollar for dollar. That's just going to wipe it out. So we can't give the money to Belinda and say, Belinda, you go roll on over to the to landlord and put the money in your account, and then you write your own check like anybody else. Well, no, it's not that good. If the parents were to pay the landlord directly, we would take that ISM reduction and we would take that $264.34 reduction. But if instead we were to contribute $1,000 a month into her ABLE account, and in turn take the funds from the ABLE account and pay the landlord directly, there would be no reduction in her SSI. I know that's bizarre, but it's going to work. So far, so good. Belinda's parents want to make sure that in the event that they pass away before Belinda, that they can continue to contribute to it. So what they do is they establish an estate planning special needs trust and direct the trustee to keep paying that ABLE account every month and turn around and pay the landlord. See how we tie them in together? Now, why would we do that? Why don't we just try to put as much money in that ABLE account as possible. There's a lien. But now here's the other problem, and I'm going to show you how the tax thing works. The IRS does impute a penalty if the distribution is for a housing QDE, which is a qualified disability expense, and they're on SSI, because the intention was, let's not give these SSI folks a break. We're still going to penalize them, but like most benefits laws, they wrote them very badly, and then there's attorneys like me that are looking for holes to drive through. I found a hole I could drive a truck right through. So let's just walk through this. So let's look on how this works. And if you use it for a housing QDE, then it's subject to the penalty and subject to the income being attributed to Belinda. So we have a 10% penalty is only levied on the income on the appreciation portion of the account that's distributed. So let's do a little math. If Belinda's parents contribute $1,000 a month, each month, and it's immediately used by Belinda for this housing QDE, the penalty would be 10% of zero.
Right.
The income imputed would be 100% of zero. In addition, by using this strategy, the chance of having a lien is almost nil. See how tying these things together can be kind of cool? So you kind of get the best of all worlds in those cases here by doing that. ABLE Act and taxes, okay, and well, we're doing okay. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about taxes. One of the things that this does grow tax-free, and hey, anything tax-free, it's where do I sign up? And of course, that's what I want to do. Maybe not. Okay. So let's focus on taxes. One of the values of the ABLE account is the growth is tax-free, just like a normal 529 plan. So like in this situation like Bob, this is really cool for somebody who is earning funds and if you go to the disabilitybenefits101.org website, that's really focused on, for many folks with disabilities, the path to independence is working, okay? But there's kind of a continuum for many folks, because they'll start working and their SSI will be impacted and all that. And then eventually, hopefully, they'll get on some other program. As like in the Bob example, Bob can take those excess earnings and put them in the ABLE account and be able to use them for a down payment on a house or whatever you need, tax-free. That's cool, but that's not the only use of it. But one of the values of it is it's tax-free, just like a 529 plan, and it's about as simple as it gets, okay? I mean, the cool thing is no CPAs, no attorneys. Hey, even for me, if you can avoid the attorney, you only want to feed the attorneys a little bit if you can, but okay. But if you use a special needs trust, it will usually qualify as what's called a qualified disability trust. And many of the distributions are deductible at the beneficiary's tax level. But it requires a tax return, and you're probably going to have to hire an attorney. Good for me, maybe not for you. Now, there's a great article, and once again, you can find it on my website about qualified disability trust and what you have to do to qualify. It's hard for a special needs trust not to qualify as a qualified disability trust. So here's what the qualified disability trust does. The trust itself, and this is actually inaccurate because it has 2015 numbers, it actually has a $4,050 exemption from income tax. Comes with its own exemption. The beneficiary has their own $4,050 tax exclusion, and they have a standard deduction of $6,300 by doing virtually nothing at all. So a third-party trust can shelter $14,300 in 2015, a little bit more by doing nothing at all, okay? And what I want you to take away from this is, if you're doing this for tax purposes, there are different options to look at here to make this work. So an ABLE account with $100,000, which is the minimum you could put in without losing the SSI, would actually have to earn over 14% in order to compete with a standard third-party special needs trust. If what is driving you is the income tax planning, that would be the way to go. Keep in mind the ABLE account is subject to a Medicaid lien. Some people care, some people don't. So let's go through another example, okay? And I like to call this the disability Carole. Tiny Tim has a disability that began before the age of 26. He is now 40, and 10 years ago, his parents, Bob and Emily, and that actually was the mom's name here, established an ABLE account for him, as well as an irrevocable third-party special needs trust that qualifies as a qualified disability trust. Uncle Ebenezer made $14,000 in gifts to Tiny's ABLE account. Uncle Charles made $140,000 in gifts, 10 gifts at $14,000 here, into a third-party trust. Tiny's ABLE account has grown tax-free. Distributions will be tax-free as well, as long as they are for qualified disability expenses. Now, see, here's the problem. If you use that ABLE account for housing, it's going to carry, you're going to actually pay taxes and a penalty, okay? Because it's growing and that kind of thing. His SSI has been in suspension ever since it grew beyond $100,000. Tiny's third-party special needs trust has been invested with a portfolio that takes into consideration the qualified disability trust exemption and Tiny's personal exemption and a standard deduction. The third-party trust can shelter $4,050 of income by doing nothing at all, and $14,400 if it makes distributions. If the third-party trust has no effect on Tiny's SSI eligibility, and if it grows over $100,000, and it is not subject to a lien. If no other donations are made, the person with signature authority over the ABLE account might want to coordinate with the trustee of the special needs trust here, because if I had a ABLE account and I had a special needs trust, which one would I want to spend first? The ABLE account, because it has a lien. Yeah. Makes sense? Okay. Spend the ABLE account first because it has a lien. Because I'm tight and I don't want Jerry Brown to get any more money, especially since he killed the SSP raise. So what's best for Tiny? There's a bunch of factors to consider. It's not just taxes, because I'm a tax attorney. So one is investment options. You're going to have more investment options in the third-party trust, which maybe isn't a good thing, okay? I mean, it could be that whoever's managing this is going to day trade with it, and there might be more risk. Benefits eligibility, desirability of Tiny to control the funds. Now, I will tell you that is a big deal here, because between the two, for those of you that went to my special needs trust presentation, in a special needs trust, the trustee has absolute discretion. And how much discretion does Tiny have? Zero. None. Well, maybe at this conference, maybe some people might feel like that's not such a good thing, right? So, I mean, in this case, Tiny gets to control the ABLE account. And if he makes a mistake, like people do, well, he made a mistake. That's just the way it goes. So, I mean, it may be one of those things. And when you're making contributions, it may have to do with how much control do you want to give Tiny, okay? The size of the funds that are being set aside. Now, there's no set amount that you pay to do a special needs trust, but they usually run a couple $1,000s. So like if Uncle Ebenezer wants to make a $10,000 gift, maybe he's not that excited about spending an extra $2,000 to set up a special needs trust. He might say, well, I'm just going to chuck it in the ABLE account and be done. The stable account costs $50, period, to set up, which is a little cheaper than what I charge, okay? By the way, I charge more than $2,000, but that's not the point. And the other thing is the lien. I mean, there are a ton of factors to consider, not the least of which is maybe having Tiny actually control the funds might make it worth doing this. And you really have to look at the situation. Now, in our last 10 minutes, let's cover a couple of things. What the heck's happening in California? There is a wonderful person named Christina Elliott, which I hope you all get to know. And one of the things I would really like you to do, now I have business cards back there if you want to get them and email and say, hey, I want you to send the links. If you put your name and your email address down here, and unless you tell me otherwise, I'm going to send your email address to Christina Elliott at the State Treasurer's Office. She's trying to find as many consumers as possible that are interested in learning about this program here. They're looking to reach out to you to find out how we can use this tool. Because I will tell you, for myself, one is I would like to see our ABLE accounts in California get tax deductions. There's a number of things we could do. But the other part of this is there's a number of laws that we're going to need to take a look at to be able to do that. So for instance, remember there's a conservatorship issue? I don't know anybody that's happy with our conservatorship laws, whether you think they should be abolished, modified. I don't know anybody that's happy with them. We can use this as a platform because here's the thing. We got to do something about this because when we have folks without capacity, what are we going to do about this? And also, how are we going to educate our judges about why this need is there? There's going to be other things we're going to need to look at so we can actually use this as a platform to change laws that work against our disability community. The other thing with this is we're going to need massive education across the country, but especially in California. I'm working with a consortium of folks, including the ARC of California, the Lanterman Coalition, the Lanterman Housing Alliance, the Golden State Pool Trust, and WID, and we're working with a number of groups. And what we want to do is pull all these different factions together and put together comprehensive education here that families should know. And what families and persons with disabilities should know is not just what can you do with an ABLE account, but why is it we need to save, right? The reason we need to save and the reason we need sustainable funding is that California promised decades ago to provide sustainable funding for our programs. Did they do it? No. Okay. This is a perfect platform to go through state, county by county by county and work with all different disability groups and really focus on the need for sustainable funding and how screwed up our programs are. Believe me, if we were with NAMI today, they would dream to have what we have, okay, here. I mean, so when we're working with zero, there's only one way to go, okay? I'm working with, I would count this as a 5.5. We could go either direction. We're certainly not a 10. In some states like Colorado, we could end up with a 0. It is not impossible, okay? So part of this is the state treasurer's department here is in charge of these things. They are really looking to work with all folks with disabilities. This is a really nice opportunity for us to not only shape how this tool is going to be used in California, maybe do something about their stinking rules about being so aggressive with the Medicaid liens and fix this damn stuff here and work on some other stuff. Last thing, in conclusion, no, I already did that. Okay, and I guess I have 7 to 10 minutes. Did I answer every question that everybody has? And if I did, you guys are insane. Well,
question, housing.
Housing.
So suppose you get 50,000 in there, you want to buy something.
Yes.
The problem is then that becomes an asset and it kills SSI.
No, it doesn't. You can own a residence of any value on SSI. You can own a residence of any value on SSI. But let's look at this. Let's say you get a residence. Now, I have on my YouTube channel, which you can find my YouTube channel here on housing, because let's say we use the ABLE account, Bob's situation, to buy a residence that he lives in. Not a problem. You could even avoid the lien if he can manage to live until 2017 by putting it in just a plain vanilla living trust, okay? Because of a law that just blows me away. I'm not even sure how this happened, but there wouldn't even be a lien. Is everything okay? No. Maybe Bob likes heat, Maybe Bob likes electricity, okay? Yeah. And he's getting $889 a month. I don't know about you. I just had a PG&E bill that was $200 and I was so happy. I just go, but I'm not on SSI, right? And maybe Bob likes to eat. So here would be the thing. You would go back to this. You would still use an ABLE account if you were assisting Bob to pay for the utilities, water, garbage, and that kind of thing. In a way, and this is why I'm trying to do these videos a piece at a time here, because it is a lot to get around. But if you look at the different components, they're actually pretty straightforward in a bizarre way. we're used to bizarre. You had a question, and then we'll take you.
Bear with me. I'm glad this is coming up right now because we established a special needs trust about 15 years ago for my son. He was diagnosed with autism back then.
Okay.
We're revisiting our special needs trust fund with our attorney next week.
Okay.
Perfect. Our alter regional person has been recommending us to go on SSI, and I'm just saying no because I don't trust them. Number one, she had not provided any rationale why I need to, and all that. That's another issue altogether.
Okay.
And I have a discussion about it at the same time too. The second part then is I've never heard about the ABLE Act. So I'm trying to see how that merges together with our special needs trust fund, because we're also looking at purchasing a, lack of a better word, a double death annuity, where you will invest like close to about $70,000 into it. At the same time, look at the benefits about $300,000.
Right.
And that's what we're looking at doing that right now. But the ABLE, I'm trying to see how that all fits.
Does your
together.
child have capacity?
Perhaps.
Okay.
Not actually sure, yeah.
Well, by the way, I have 3 children that are not technically disabled, and I would say perhaps. Okay, so we go. And here's the thing. So here's the cool thing. You might ask, I write 2 software programs. So if they use the Wealth Council or Elder Council program, tell them to talk with me because we're going to be amending the program. The program. Now you could do this without it to say that trustee can make payments to an ABLE account. Now, here's the thing. Your child has capacity, maybe doesn't have capacity, we don't know, let's see. So you open up an ABLE account, put $500 in there, see what he does with it, okay? Now, if he does something really crazy, and it's one of these things come up, give him a second chance, okay? Any of us ever made a mistake, and that's the problem with a lot of programs. You make one mistake and we're never doing that again. Well, my God, where would we be? I learned from mistakes, and it's like if you do it 3 or 4 times, well, then you got a problem. So you do that and you can use it as a learning tool, because here's the problem with special needs trust, and this is how I make my living. Your son cannot control that special needs trust. Now, maybe that's appealing, okay? But on the other hand, how are you going to teach him to be independent if we always keep him dependent? Kind of goes with this conference. So you might tie the 2 things together and give him a chance to fuck up. Or to mess up.
Yes, no.
Fuck up. Okay, so anyway, I'm sorry. Here.
It's late.
Another question?
I think I might have just misunderstood a little bit, but you were talking about the qualified housing expenses.
Yes.
That would be deducted from SSI.
Right. Well, it won't be deducted from SSI. It's kind of schizophrenic thinking. Okay, so you got to go with the feng shui here. If you make the housing for payment for housing expenses, SSI doesn't care. They plain don't care. In fact, their rules are very explicit. We don't care. This is not our problem. This is the Department of Treasury's problem. We go over to the Department of Treasury's, quite frankly, they don't care either, except for if you're on SSI, a housing QDE, it's going to be subject to the lien and the income.
But not if you use it for a deposit or a down payment on a house.
I think that's housing, but I don't know. Okay. And I will tell you, if Department of Treasury gets a chance, they'll say it's okay. Honest to God, they are the loosest group. And I know I work with a bunch of advocates with WID, and we had to talk about this. And I think the biggest thing we had to deal with, and we had a bunch of ABLE administrators who I got to see what our community deals with. They are so paranoid about SSI and Medi-Cal, they just couldn't get their head wrapped around that there's a program this loose. It's just this loose. So I don't know for a deposit. Reason would say yes, but that's not what we're doing. Definitely. So if you built it up, remember the penalty is on the income that was earned and 10% on the income earned. So like in Bob's situation here, with the example where he earned $10,000, well, that could be significant dollars. But if we do it money in, money out, it's 10% of nothing. And that math's pretty easy.
I think we have time for one more.
You had mentioned that you had set up some accounts in Ohio.
probably about 30.
Okay, are those people on SSI right now?
Yes, they're all on needs-based benefits.
And they've gone through a redetermination and have
Nope.
gotten?
No redetermination to have.
Well, we basically do a redetermination on all our SSI recipients every year. We're given the list by Social Security.
Who are we?
We're a representative payee agency.
This is absolutely not counted. And by the way, if you want to take my email it to me.
Okay.
I will send you the palms.
Okay.
Hard to believe, doesn't count.
My Social Security office said, don't touch them, we'll tell you.
No.
You can't.
The palms are already written. It's already solid law. You could teach your Social Security office itself.
I'm scared.
You know what? You should have been to the WID conference. Yeah, I understand being terrified of Social Security.
Our job is to keep people in pay.
Right.
So I would not be the regional center would say we're not gonna have you as a vendor.
Exemplar, yeah. Send me, take my,
Quickly.
email it to me. I will send you the palms.
Thank you.
You know what the palms are?
I do.
Bingo.
I've never
Okay.
seen them, but
And there's new palms coming and they're all good. Okay? Hard to believe. So I get to teach your Social Security office something, but I would have those things right away. Yeah.
Okay.
Apparently we are getting yanked here, so
Mr. Thank you.
yes.
Thanks so much for your time.
Okay.
Nice job.
Thank you.
And